All right, let's take you now to Johannesburg, where the former ANC KZN Secretary Mdumiseni Ntuli has been endorsed by provinces including Gauteng and parts of KwaZulu-Natal to become the Secretary General of the ANC. The office, which is a custodian of the branches, has been in a state of paralysis since the suspension of Ace Magashule and the passing of his deputy, Jessie Duarte. Newzroom Afrika also learning that Gauteng Premier David Makhura, who was among those touted for the position of Secretary General, has stepped back in order to allow for Ntuli's name to be nominated. Well, Newzroom Afrika's Ziyanda Ncobo is with Mr. Ntuli this morning. Ziyanda, good morning to you. What brings Mr. Ntuli to Johannesburg? Is he working the ground somewhat here?
Oh, he's absolutely working the ground. In fact, I'm told he's going to be heading to another province after this interview. But I tell you what, Koli, it's quite interesting that Mdumiseni Ntuli's name is being touted to become the ANC Secretary General, given the fact that, Mr. Ntuli, your own province snubbed you to return as provincial secretary in that July elective conference. I mean, how would you respond to that in terms of giving an analysis of the state of politics within the province of KwaZulu-Natal vis-a-vis other provinces saying, actually, we think you have the capacity to lead?
Well, I think you see, Ziyanda, we come from a particular period in KwaZulu-Natal, and many people who have been very far from the work we've been doing in the province would find it difficult to understand how we have traveled from 2018 up to where we are today. Even when we went to a provincial conference in July, it was perfectly clear in our minds that we were proceeding to a conference to hand over an organization that was much more better, much more united, and having traveled, as I said, the past 4 years under very difficult and unprecedented circumstances in KwaZulu-Natal. So I think people who were following us throughout the country were very, very excited with the manner in which we exercised leadership during those difficult periods. How we united the ANC, which we inherited in 2018, with more or less about 700 branches in good standing, 4 or 5 regions in good standing, and we've now handed it over with almost 900 branches of the ANC in good standing. And of course, all regions having convened their regional conferences to elect regional executive committees. So I'm saying what you see outside, beyond the borders of KwaZulu-Natal, is an appreciation by many comrades, many people in the ANC, of the sterling work that we've done to lead under very difficult and complex circumstances in KwaZulu-Natal. You will recall that one of the things, maybe just briefly to explain to you, is that we came back from Nazareth, which is a heavily divided province, yes, between what was called the CR and the NTZ or the JZ question.
Which has returned. But
and of course, and as we were preparing for the provincial conference, a few months before that, a provincial conference, you remember that President Zuma was recalled, and immediately after that he was charged. And that compounded the situation in the province, because the great divide between those who had supported Comrade NTZ and Comrade President Ramaphosa in 2017 was deepening, was intensifying at that moment when Zuma was recalled, and Zuma was also, the charges were reinstated against him. So we had to navigate that period leading to the elections in 2019 and beyond the elections. And I think you would know then what happened with the issues around the Royal House and what happened with the Shembe Church. Yes. Let alone the July unrest that took place in the province. So we had to steer the ship under very, very complex and challenging circumstances. I believe that there has never been a leadership in KwaZulu-Natal throughout the years of our movement that has had to lead the organization under such complicated, complex, and unprecedented experience in the province.
So why do you think then that other comrades from other provinces would be able to appreciate the dynamics that you've just unpacked, but the branches within the province itself that she led could not appreciate that. And you've mentioned former President Jacob Zuma. I mean, he's just put his hand up to become ANC national chair. Of course, there is the step-aside rules, but his parole, his sentence, 15-month sentence, is up now in mid-October, which also could pave the way for him to be active in politics again. What is your diagnosis of that? Because that falls within then the politics of KwaZulu-Natal, and you not returning as secretary.
You see, there was a leading to the provincial conference. It was very clear that the then leadership was going to be returned, which means that myself and the then provincial chairperson, Comrade KZN, were going to be re-elected. It was very clear. The situation turned to a different direction a few weeks before the conference, and that is because a very offensive campaign was led, which was saying that we have turned our backs on JZ and that we have not supported JZ all these years when he has been going through difficulties. So that lie was peddled, and it escalated, it catch fire throughout the province, that the old man has been rejected, has not been supported by the leadership of the ANC. And of course that happened in an environment where already there are new interests which are emerging about how to posture and position their own processes or interests towards the national conference of the ANC. I think that narrative, that strange narrative, and of course combined with the fact that for over a period of time there's been a very serious effort by certain forces in the province which were all the time hell-bent to ensure that KZN does not become a fertile ground for the sitting leadership of the ANC, particularly President Cyril Ramaphosa. So if anything in KZN, once people then write into this lie that was told that we've rejected JZ, we've not supported him, which is not true, by the way, and we can explain in detail how we have been interacting with former President Zuma, including how we gave support to him, politically and organizationally, because our own approach has always been that we must give support that is consistent with our responsibilities as the leadership of the province. Giving support doesn't mean that you have to go and take instructions on all matters and every issue that you have to deal with. What it means is that, for instance, you have to say, on this question, this is what we think needs to be done as the leadership of the province. It may very well be that in some instances it will differ with what President Zuma would have wanted things, the manner in which he would have wanted things to be done. And in the eyes of other people, including those who are peddling the lie that we have turned our backs on him, it then became a rallying story which was used to ensure that they influenced the outcome of the provincial conference. But many people in the country, including in the National Executive Committee, who are familiar with our position, who understand that we have been very steadfast on matters of principle, continue to appreciate the role we have played under the conditions and the circumstances that we found ourselves in.
The reason why I'm asking about, the dynamics and why you didn't return is because if you do become ANC Secretary General, you would be tasked with rebuilding, the organization in terms of the branches. There's long been a conversation about the quality of the membership. What would your vision be if you're already saying there were new interests that emerged in KwaZulu-Natal, which still is the largest grouping? How would you even unite with those comrades who you are saying were working against you, peddling lies, and really undermining then the democracy of the organization?
Well, you see, one of the things that I think has been a very serious inspiration for those who have been following our leadership. You see, I always say to comrades, it's probably unprecedented that a sitting chairperson who's a premier and a sitting provincial secretary will lose a conference. And the reason why we were not necessarily surprised about that is because we've always exercised leadership in the best interest of the ANC. We never wanted to manipulate processes in order to produce an outcome that will be consistent with our own personal interests and aspirations, myself and Sihle and the rest of that collective. We prepared the organization properly to ensure that when it convenes a conference, the branches will have a possibility to choose the leadership of their own choice without any kind of manipulation being done by the sitting leadership. My sense is that part of the reasons why my name is resonating with a number of comrades across the country is because all of us are yearning from that kind of leadership. A leadership that effectively insulates its own personal interest to the running affairs of the African National Congress. A leadership that is genuinely committed to the renewal of the ANC. A leadership that is principled, is associated with certain values, does not wave and does not assume popular stance or populist in terms of how we are addressing the challenges facing the movement and the challenges confronting the national democratic revolution. You see, my own view is that we have to proceed with this agenda of the renewal of the ANC. We have no choice. We've got to proceed with it. And it has to assume different forms. One of the forms is that at an institutional level, I'm one of the people, even in 2017 and today, who is arguing very, very strongly, advocating for a restructuring of the institution of the ANC in the following manner. Firstly, we need to restructure the headquarters to have, for instance, 2 Deputy Secretary Generals of the ANC. 1 DSG that must be responsible for policy development, monitoring and evaluation, and governance matters. The ANC can no longer afford corresponding with the state of governance, both at a national, provincial, as well as at a local level. So the ANC must equally have the capacity to generate its own policies, to evaluate the implementation of those policies, to determine well ahead of time whether this policy is actually impacting positively or otherwise in the lives of our people. The other Deputy Secretary General, for instance, you need somebody that is going to take a responsibility now to drive this program, to conceptualize, to lead the campaigns, to ensure that the renewal of the ANC effectively takes off on the ground. You see, we've lost our capacity to lead the campaign, as a consequence of which we're having a decline in terms of our influence to the working class. You might have seen what happened to the COSATU Congress.
And I was just about to go there because, you know, part of rebuilding means also being connected to your constituency.
That's correct, yeah.
There's 2024 around the corner. And some of your detractors could say, but this is all good and well, but you had 4 years in KwaZulu-Natal, 4 or 5 years more or less in KwaZulu-Natal to do exactly that. And yet your leadership at the time oversaw one of the worst electoral declines in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, which is basically even giving way for opposition parties such as the IFP to actually claw and take back. I mean, you lost Umhlatuze municipality, the second biggest city in the province. That is something that some would say you should be ashamed of.
You see, let me explain, because we've got to understand these things within their proper context. You have a leadership that is elected in July 2018. Immediately after the elections, it has to prepare for the 2019 general elections, which I think we did very well. I mean, we hosted the biggest ever rally of the ANC in Moses Mabhida Stadium in January, hardly 6 months after we were elected. We led the campaign. We made it possible for both the current and the former president of the ANC to campaign alongside to reinforce the agenda of the African National Congress on the ground. I think what we need to understand about what happened in 2021 local government elections, and we've got to understand it very well, is that you then entered into a period of about 2 years where you couldn't save the structures of the ANC because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The whole of 2010, for instance, we never met with a branch of the ANC except virtually. The big part of 2021 up until around August, September, there was never an opportunity for the leadership to interface and interact with the structures of the ANC on the ground. Because the rebuilding process does not require you to correspond. You've got to physically get engaged, build the organization, ensure that branches are actively leading massive visible campaigns on the ground. We couldn't do that for 2 years. By the way, we could not even succeed to build branches. We were limping from one area to another with task teams at regional level, at branch level. And I do want to say to those of our critics, as you say, who may say that we did not do well in 2021, that what was the state of the ANC at that time? You have 11 regions in KZN, 8 of them were without elected regional executive committees. You have almost 900 branches in KwaZulu-Natal. More than 700 of those branches were without elected branch executive committees. And you see, when you don't have an elected structure, a task team always has difficulties in terms of legitimacy. and the capacity to command the respect of the people on the ground. So we went to the elections very, very weak, very, very weak. It was inevitable that, yes, of course, other parties may say we're also having problems, but our style of work is not the same.
Okay.
The ANC is able to discharge its responsibilities because of its ability to connect daily and frequently with the masses of our people on the ground. So that's the reason. That's why I'm saying why you need a new office of the DSG to deal with the organizing work. It's because we need to move ahead, to steam ahead with this important task of the renewal of the ANC.
Do you think those that have come before you have done a good job? In particular, suspended Secretary General Ace Magashule in ensuring the capacity, because the problems of KwaZulu-Natal are not necessarily insulated. COVID-19 affected all, and coming into, if you do become Secretary General, you'd have to obviously take over something from Ntuli House.
Look, I think they've done their part, and of course, it is not up to me to make a judgment about whether they were able to live up to the expectations of the masses of our people and the ANC as an organization. There are new interventions which have been worked out around the membership system of the ANC. There are new resolutions about how to protect the integrity and the standing of the African National Congress. And those interventions, I think, they are quite important to ensure that they set us on the path towards the renewal of the African National Congress. But this renewal of the ANC is also not going to be an easy undertaking. It has opponents within the ANC and outside the ANC. There are people who are beneficiaries of a weak ANC, which is unable to campaign, unable to be effective, unable to determine effectively who should be our leaders. So they get elected, they are sent to different layers of leadership, from the branch to the REC up to the national level. Of course, it is inevitable that when you effectively embark on the renewal of the ANC, such forces are going to oppose you. They will not agree with that agenda, because ultimately, in a renewed ANC, they will not be part of that organization, given the fact that they do not espouse and accept and embrace the value system of the African National Congress, which, as I'm saying, is consistent with the ideals of the National Democratic Revolution. There is a way in which we are expected to conduct ourselves in the ANC, including how we interact with the rest of the population. Many of these forces that will oppose to the renewal of the ANC would be largely because, in any event, they did not join the ANC because they identify with its own policies. They joined the ANC because they wanted to achieve certain objectives which are not consistent with the NDR.
So which forces then are to blame for having a president on May Day being booed, having an ANC national chair not being able to give fraternal greetings at a COSATU Congress? Yes, former President Jacob Zuma also experienced the same fate, a year before or a year or two before. But it cannot be said that it's just forces within or outside that are to blame then for the frayed relations, even within the tripartite alliance. Yeah,
you see, let me explain it in this context. The reason why I was saying in my earlier point, you need a DSG that is going to purely focus on the rebuilding the campaign capacity of the ANC. You know, the ANC over a period of time has become very weak in terms of its influence within what we call the motive forces of the National Democratic Revolution, the working class and other social forces within our country. The reason why, for instance, you see the challenges that have emerged in COSATU. They are part of a deep-seated problem that we need to respond to. For instance, you now have COSATU, the trade union movement, the ally of the African National Congress, which is now gradually becoming a public sector kind of a trade union movement, losing massive influence within the private sector, and that on its own presents certain challenges to the work that the ANC has to do. You may know what Lenini calls labor aristocracy, which is a reflection of a labor trade union movement that is not able to organize anywhere else other than the public sector. And of course, that the failure of the National Liberation Movement, the ANC as a lead of that alliance, to do a great deal of work within the various sectors of our society, including within the working class, is actually manifesting itself in what happened to the national chairperson of the ANC. We need to reposition the ANC not only to be the trusted ally of our people on the ground, but equally for COSATU and the Communist Party to believe and to follow the leadership of the African National Congress, which historically is what has been happening. That we're in the kind of a situation that we are is precisely because the head, which is the lead of the tripartite alliance in this country, and the leader of all progressive forces, it is at its weakest. And as that's why I'm saying, that is what we need to, unless we have a campaigning ANC, it will not be able to influence the rest of the motive forces of the National Democratic Revolution in our country.
I'm very interested in knowing about your thoughts on what seems to be, as former President Kgalema Motlanthe described, as somewhat of a foreign tendency, where it seems now that instead of this process that you've entered into, the branches nominating the leadership, it seems as though it's taken a top-down approach, which you may or may not be a beneficiary of, where you have the PECs saying that these are the names that they're putting forward for the top 6, whereas not all the branches have sat. So this seems to be more of a top-down approach, as opposed to Amandla Sema said, and the power lies within the branches. As the SG, I mean, you would be the custodian of the branches. What do you have to say about this new tendency that's emerging from the leadership?
You see, it's one of these things that we've got to strike here against. We have to contend very effectively against this kind of a behavior that seeks to undermine the historical positions of our movement. When you open a process for nomination of leadership, the expectation, and this has always been the case in the ANC, is that we are now allowing branches of the ANC to convene in different parts of the country in order to have a conversation, first and foremost, about the challenges facing the NTR, and therefore deciding the quality and the type of leadership that is required to take us forward. But when we have pronouncements that are being done, these pronouncements, to a certain extent, they dilute and distort the task that is actually on the shoulders of the ANC branches on the ground, which are the ones that are supposed to say, now that the process has been open, we have an opportunity to have a conversation and to determine our own leadership. But these are part of the challenges that we need to respond to, reflect on as we proceed in our work of the renewal of the ANC. I just want to make one example about why I think this renewal of the ANC will have to take a different approach. For instance, it's important, I said earlier on, the expression of this kind of leadership that should not be in the organization, or kind of membership that should not be in the organization, is not only found within the rank and files.
Yeah.
It will also be found in the leadership. That is why part of what the organization has to deal with, has to contend with, is how do we make sure that those who join the ANC are the people who are joining the ANC because they identify with its own policies and they are prepared and committed to embrace the value system of the African National Congress. That is why I'm part of those who are advocating for a period where all of us must have our membership expiring, rejoin the ANC, and when I rejoin the ANC, I have to explain the reason why do I think I have a value to add as being a member of the ANC. I can still be a voter of the ANC without joining it. I need to explain to the ANC, why do I want my membership to be renewed in order for me to remain a member of the ANC? To do what? What is it that I want to do? What's my understanding of the ANC, its mission, its values, and what talent am I bringing to the African National Congress? Not to say the ANC, when I join it, I'm now waiting for the ANC to have something done for myself in order to benefit. But it's important that as members of the ANC, we must be the one, because the ANC historically has always been what I can characterize as a gathering of the great talents in our country.
Yeah.
The best amongst us have always occupied the membership and the leadership echelons in the African National Congress. Now that is no longer the case. We therefore need to pose the question, if you want to join the ANC, for what reason do you want to join the ANC? Why can't you remain a voter? If you want to join the ANC because you are bringing a certain talent and skill that will help us to move forward in our task of advancing the cause of the National Democratic Revolution, and then that should be what we accept, so that we can make sure that those who join and those who are becoming members because others have joined for them would not be able to remain within the membership file of the African National Congress.
I mean, that would be quite the mammoth task, because you would know that there's been numerous diagnostic reports about the quality of members of the ANC. So much so that perception seems to be taking more ground than reality, which is what you've explained to be the reasons why you didn't return as ANC KZN secretary, which is also why then I'd want to know what your views are on whether or not getting support and an endorsement from former President Jacob Zuma means you may be standing a chance of losing a lot of support from your own home province of KwaZulu-Natal in becoming then the ANC Secretary General. Is that a correct assessment? You need Zuma or nothing?
No. Let me start by which the earlier issue that I was raising about how do we make sure that we implement what we've agreed upon. Part of what has been a problem in the ANC has been the capacity to implement our own resolutions, which is why I was arguing earlier on that you need to restructure the headquarters of the ANC, reposition it in such a manner that it will be able to live up to the task of the day, the task of the moment in terms of the advancing the agenda of the African National Congress on the ground. Well, I don't think that, I've been I've been elected in the structures of the ANC on many occasions without any directly or indirect endorsement of anybody. When I became the provincial secretary of the ANC in 2018, the people who were campaigning against my name, because I was standing with Comrade Super Zuma, they were saying that I should not be elected because Zuma does not approve of my election, and that Zuma would prefer Super Zuma to come back as provincial secretary of the ANC. I don't think it really matters to that extent in terms of who pronounces on your support. I think members of the ANC, quite a lot of them, by the way, throughout the country, have had an experience in one way or the other, directly or indirectly, with the work that we've been doing, the conduct that we've displayed in the course of our occupants as provincial secretary of the ANC, and how we have interacted with complex matters that are facing the National Democratic Revolution. They are very difficult challenges today in South Africa. And we need a leadership that would be able to understand how to respond to the difficult challenges that we're confronting, including, as I said earlier on, to work within the motive forces of the NTR to strengthen the alliance. I don't agree, for instance, with the position that says the SSCP must go in its own way, COSATU must go in its own way. Okay. It's a fail of leadership. The ANC headquarters has to reassess its authority and leadership influence to those sectors and bring them back so that we rebuild a strong alliance as it has been historically.
You're speaking out of a failure of leadership. Some could interpret that as you saying it's a failure of the leadership led by President Cyril Ramaphosa. It's interesting that you mentioned the issue of the implementation of resolutions of the ANC, because that is by and large a critique that has been waged against the sitting president, that he there as a deployee in the government has not implemented these resolutions. And what then is your diagnosis? You'll be doing a lot of diagnostic reports if you were ANC SG of the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa, with a weakened tripartite alliance, a weak economy, and really a weak state of the organization even internally.
Yeah. You see, if you followed the address of the president at the National Policy Conference a few months ago, one of the admissions that he made was that the ANC is at its ever weakest position. Ever. We've never had an organization that is weak, the African National Congress, that is weak as it is today. And of course, there are a variety of factors around that. But people who are simplistic and people who are campaigning to be elected on the basis of decampaigning others will appropriate that weakness of the ANC purely to an individual, which in this case is President Cyril Ramaphosa. And unfortunately, some of those who are doing that are serving members of the National Executive Committee who themselves have been part of that leadership. So you can't say, because of these failures, because of these weaknesses, the problem can only be appropriated to a particular individual. My own view is that it has been an interception of many circumstances and many factors. One of those, as I said, you elect a leadership in Nasrec. Soon after that, the leadership is not cohering. You don't have a president and a secretary general of the ANC pulling to the same direction. And that's a center you need. You need the president and the secretary general because one is in charge of the state, so to say, the other one runs the party. And if the two are unable to complement one another effectively, it is bound to happen that the rest of the leadership of the organization will disintegrate. You know, part of the problem that I've been complaining about, including as a serving provincial secretary of the ANC then, is that the ANC is being fragmented to a point where we're becoming federal. Yeah. Provinces are becoming more powerful than the national office of the ANC. That's not the character of the ANC. The ANC is a unitary organization. Even with the payment of the staff, I've been arguing that it cannot be correct. We must not accept the argument that says provinces that are able to pay for their staff members must do so. Those that can't wait must wait until the head office has got money. We are one organization. The little that I have wherever I come from, I need to put it into the common pot and let that be shared by all of us in order to ensure that we retain the unitary character of the African National Congress. So yes, I agree with people who say a number of policies have not been implemented, weaknesses in the organization, but I'm vehemently opposed to that being appropriated only to one individual. There's been a fail of leadership in general, and that leadership, of course, the face of that leadership will be President Cyril Ramaphosa, but many of these comrades who are also available for leadership now have been part of that leadership of the National Executive Committee, including in government. So we have a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think the major weakness was when you can't have a president and a secretary general who are pulling to the same direction. It got exacerbated, of course, with the untimely death of Comrade Jessie Duarte, the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC. That made the ANC to even be more weaker than it has ever been. So I think those are the challenges that, in my own view, in repositioning the organization at a national level, because you see, if the national office is strong, is firm, is coherent, is led by people who understand the ANC, not populist, not people who, because the wind is going to this direction, will start singing along that song to follow the wind. People who are prepared to say, this is right, this is wrong. You know, I want to make one example. I explained this to the provincial conference of the ANC. You know, when the decision was taken by the court that President Zuma would be arrested,
yes,
myself and Comrade Sikhezikala, the chair, we went to see him. And when we went to see him, we said to him, you see, Comrade President, you have been part of this movement for more than 60 years. In an event where you are to be arrested now and you refuse to be arrested, for instance, clearly there's going to be a confrontation here in your backyard between the police or among the police, your family and comrades that are coming to support you. Our own view as the leadership of the ANC is that when that day comes, you should voluntarily hand yourself to the police to be arrested so that you avoid what you had avoided in the past, a bloodbath which is avoidable, yes, as opposed to a sacrifice of one person, in this case that could be yourself. When we raised that matter with some of our comrades, they felt that that was selling out to President Zuma. But our view was that arresting Zuma alone, as it happened in July last year, cannot be equated to a battle between the police forces and comrades that were camping outside his residence, which would have resulted to a massacre. Yeah. Our view was that, no, we can't take that. So I'm saying we need a leadership that is not populist, not driven by this thing of wanting to be accepted for doing wrong things.
All right, we are unfortunately out of time, but that's Mdumiseni Ntuli, former KZN secretary of the ANC, but also then a name that has been touted to become the Secretary General of the organization, bringing up several proposals on how Luthuli House could be restructured so that the custodian of the branches then is strengthened, the capacity is reinforced, and that perhaps then the ANC has a better chance of better prospects at the 2024 polls.